Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, and we're going to talk about social hierarchies in cities, towns, and villages in Dungeons & Dragons' default setting of Faerun. I've been thinking a lot more about, just really been thinking a lot about the social and hierarchical structures within Faerun, within the default setting of Dungeons & Dragons. Because we really have these beautiful depictions of Waterdeep and specifically of Phandalin. And also, of course, I have, my village of Silver Hollow, right, which is, it's on the western side of the forest, the Neverwinter Forest, up toward Hotenow, right? So we have these, depictions of these locations within Faerun, and because of Strixhaven, I've been thinking about the future of social interaction in my game, right? So, as Dungeons and Dragons 5th Edition dungeon masters, we get the choice to accept this invitation that Strixhaven is, right? So Strixhaven is saying, hey, okay, 47 years of combat pillar, now the social interaction pillar begins, right? And we're going to have high mechanical complexity for friendship, for love, and also Strixhaven is a bold exclamation of hierarchy, human, and actually humanoid hierarchy. I think it's one of the things we really have not kind of dived into at the deeper level. And I'm really interested in this because I've been thinking about the sources of power within Waterdeep, Phandalin, and Silver Hollow, okay? And how they interact in different ways and exist in different ways. So let's talk about Waterdeep, right? So what are the groupings, the social hierarchies of power, okay? So when you're in Waterdeep, it is, no pun intended, the deepest. You have houses, right? So houses are massive centers of wealth and power, right? And the people who are connected to those houses, and you and your player characters can easily connect themselves to those houses right at the beginning of the game. The game invites player characters to attach themselves to wealth from the very beginning with the noble background, right? And that's very interesting. Dungeons and Dragons, it doesn't make you roll for is like, hey, do you want to be attached to a wealthy, powerful house? No problem. Just literally listed on your sheet. That's a pretty incredible amount of it shows how wonderful Dungeons and Dragons 5th Edition is, because I think in some of the earlier editions there was a lot more of this, you're a dirt farmer, you don't matter, right? But if you can write on your sheet, I am, the second, daughter of a noble house in Waterdeep, it's going to be hard to dismiss you even at level 1, right? Because you can bring in power right away with a request, right? And that's completely legitimate, right? That's a major statement, right? Now, so let's look at Waterdeep real quick. You got houses, you have guilds, right? The Brewers Guild, the Blacksmiths Guild, the Thieves Guild, in Waterdeep, and so you have the houses, you have the guilds, and these are in order of the power they wield. The guilds are no joke; they wield a lot of power, right? And then, in addition to that, you have factions, right? So factions are the Harpers, Force Grey, Zentarum. Some very dark factions are in there as well, right? And so you have the houses, you have the guilds, you have the factions, and then this is very important to remember. Below the factions, you have the Powerless. In the city of Waterdeep, there are people who have fallen through the cracks, and because they're not X'd up, right? So what does it mean to be X'd up? So there's you, and then there's your group. right? And you're like, I'm not alone. You can't roll at me because I'm attached to this house. You can't roll at me because I'm attached to this guild. You can't roll at me because I'm attached to this faction, right? And players may overlay those social interactions and those specific powers. Now, one of the reasons why I've been thinking about this is I'm thinking about how I want to change the next time I run Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and really set a solid base that is going to use this new higher complexity, the actual opening of the social interaction pillar, right? I believe everything before. I think if you look at the combat pillar, you know it's real because there is high mechanical complexity. And I'm a firm believer that a pillar doesn't exist until it has high mechanical complexity, right? And so we're moving into this stage where we're going to have high mechanical complexity. Now, so you have the houses, you have the guilds, you have the factions, and you have the powerless. And the powerless are listed because we have incredibly powerful player characters, right? And the powerless should be there so that they can be helped, right? And also to just let the player characters know you're not a dirt farmer, right? Like, you are entering the game with significant power, and your decisions, literally, the events of this world are going to circle around you, right? And now that we're moving into this second pillar, we're moving into the social interaction pillar, where it's going to have high mechanical complexity, and those mechanics are going to actually be useful in the game, not performatively useful. And we're moving past a performative stage for social interaction and moving into a real stage. It's very important, right? So then let's look at Phandalin real quick. Now, there are no houses in Phandalin, right? But there are guilds, okay? And the factions just pass through, okay? And here, the powerless do not seem nearly as powerless in Phandalin as they are in Waterdeep, right? If you don't have a lot of money, that's not going to be as sharp a contrast in Phandalin as it is in Waterdeep, right? And last, in Silverhollow, in a little village, right? No houses, no guilds, right? You will only have one blacksmith at most in a village. Maybe you have somebody who goes to a town to assist a blacksmith, right? And they do a little bit of tinkering in their village, right? And factions, they might host somebody who's in a faction one night in a year, right? And then the powerless are the core group in a village, right? And so we see these different interactions, right? Now, why do we want to revisit and relook at these in high detail and do special rules hacks within our own game, right? Invited to by page 4 on the DMG. The rules aren't in charge, you're in charge, right? Why do we want to do that? Well, I have to admit, I really was affected by the combat pillar personally, right? And I did 2 things specifically, actually, I guess I did 3. So I started DMing when I was 12, and when I was in high school, I did track and wrestling as 2 sports, right? And one of the reasons why I was like, I want to win, I want to defeat, I want to compete, right? And Dungeons & Dragons had given me that, had told me, you're not a spectator, right? Like, you're a doer, and you're going to get in there and do. And I did, and actually I wasn't great at either one. I was, junior varsity, and I did make it to varsity in my junior and senior year in high school. And also, I did help the team, and I did help the team move forward as an overall, team. So I was very proud of that time. But then I think the next thing that really came from the combat pillar was horseback riding. Now, I have never ridden a horse, right? So, why do I say horseback riding? Well, The biggest one is bicycling is a huge part of my life. I really love to bicycle. It's my number one physical activity. I really, really like it. It's exploratory, and it allows me to move through spaces very, very quickly, urban spaces specifically, very, very quickly, and explore, right? And the reason why, why I use a bicycle and not a horse is money, right? Like, I probably dumped $1,000 into my bike. I don't think you would get even 2 months of horseback riding for $1,000, right? Horseback riding is very expensive, right? But bicycling gives you pretty much, I'd say, like 75% of all the joys and all the privileges of horseback riding at a much, much lower cost, right? And that came directly from me knowing a ton about cavaliers and mounted combat and wanting to have that movement in my real life. And then last is archery. I've done a lot of archery, right? And and I was like, hey, this is something I do in Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm going to take advantage of this and do this in real life and learn about it, right? So those have been incredibly valuable to me, right? But one of the things I haven't done is I haven't really explored improving my social interactions through Dungeons and Dragons, right? It just really, and the reason why is there wasn't any reason to, right? Like, there's literally two skills. Like, there's like persuasion and intimidation, right? Which is, it's performative. Social interaction pillar has been performative. It's not actual the way combat is. It's not 47 years of deep, layered complexity. And every single class and every single, and spells and weapons and armor and all, like, the social interaction pillar has been performative, right? But Amanda Hayman's new Strixhaven book invites us into this area where we can start to learn about ourselves as humans, right? And take major learnings and major inspirations from Dungeons and Dragons to begin to, craft our social interaction in IRL as well, right? And I think a lot of, if you talk to any Dungeons and Dragons, they will tell the same thing. Many of them have gone into the SCA, or they might have actually done some sword fighting, or they do crafting. I know one guy who got into brewing, because he was, because he played a character who was a brewer, and then he actually tried to do a couple batches. There's all these, really interesting things that come out of Dungeons and Dragons, and and this idea that we would look at the game and allow it to help us position ourselves in IRL, right? So, and I look at it, and so, like, there are areas where I have been able to make some serious social interaction achievements, but there are definitely gaps in my social interaction knowledge, right? One of them that I've thought about for a long time is I'm the tech lead at my church, which, it's a little on the nose, right? I'm a tech person, and I'm in that tech ministry, and I'm proud that I serve in the church, but I have, for all my life, really, wanted to be a deacon or an elder, and I've never made it, right? And I look and I realize there's a whole host of reasons, like my social interaction skills were never strong enough to reach that, right? But Dungeons and Dragons, especially now that we're moving into this new era that says, let's use the same microscope that we used for combat to look at social interaction and learn, like, what does allow people to convince, control, convert, right? What does a requester need to have to get something from a requestee, right? And I think, I, like most humans, are like, well, it's just transactional, whatever they're going to need, and then whatever I get. But that's one of the things that I've learned. When you look at the world, you see people who are able to get things from other people, and it's not based on logic. It's not based on a transaction. They're just saying, I want this thing, and then the other people give that thing, right, for a whole host of reasons, right? And so, I'm looking at Dungeons and Dragons now and saying, okay, I understand these groupings, these X's, right? Like, I'm alone. If you're by the way, there's no better way to be powerless than to be alone, right? But then if you X yourself by, being aligned to a noble house, and then you have, wealthy people who are aligned with you, or if you guild up, right, and you have guild people with you, or if you have factions with you, or if you don't have guilds, factions, or any noble connections, but you simply change your physical location, maybe then things change, right? And so seeing how these gears and these mechanisms move, right? This is, this means major changes at the table, and there's a distinct possibility that for low millions of players, right? Because we have 11 million D&D players. That was the count for 2019. You could have 2, 3, 4 million people start to transform and change their IRL lives with lessons they learn in the game as the game says, we did a great job of building the combat pillar. Now let's do a great job of building the social interaction pillar, right? And that gate that Amanda Heyman has created to allow us to walk into this deeper, richer future, right? I've really given a lot of thought about it, and I think I'm excited about the possibility of moving beyond IRL advantages from the combat pillar and getting IRL advantages for social interaction. And Amanda Heyman permissioning people to understand this is completely doable, and you are permissioned, from Wizards of the Coast, honoring Gary Gygax's legacy to do the second part of what Gary always intended. It's exciting. All that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.